In this video, we're going to look at 6 tips for cold weather concealed carry. So as you can see, it's winter here in the Midwest, and it gets cold. The good thing about that is we can conceal a larger weapon pretty easily. The bad thing is we have to get to it. So what we want to look at are some of the concepts and areas we got to be concerned about with this cold weather concealed carry. And our first thing we need to look out for is our outer garment. Okay, so if you have an open front outer garment, okay, that's going to make it a lot easier to get to your gun. If you're in conditions where you could do that, if it's not too cold and you don't have to be outside for long periods. Now the thing, if you can do this, is you want to have just one layer between you and the gun if possible. I have a couple layers on here, but I put the gun outside of the inner layer so that I only have one layer between me and access to the firearm. Okay, so if you can do that, that's the way to go. It's going to be a lot faster. So with the closed front, what we got to watch out for is the waistline. Can I get to the gun? Is there enough flexibility in this material? If it's something that's really stiff material that's not going to give it all, I may have a difficult time getting that gun up over, or my clothing up over the gun to access the holster. Now, some coats like this have where it zips from the bottom, so I can leave it up a little bit where it's going to be able to clear, and I'm still going to be able to access my gun. There are also ones that have zippers on the sides that may enable you to do that. But if you have something that is just too stiff to do that, you're not going to be able to access reliably and quickly. You need to look at another option. Okay. Now, something else you need to be aware of with this time of year and this type of clothing is I have to watch out for grommets, strings, things like that, material that could get into the trigger guard. So if there's something in that trigger guard and then we force this gun into the holster, you're going to have a discharge here. It could be a real issue. So you need to make sure when you're reholstering, you're careful with that, with all this extra clothing on. If you reholster and you feel some kind of pressure, something in the way, don't force it in and end up possibly shooting yourself. Make sure you clear everything, make some room, and then insert the gun and get that cleared up. Okay, tip number 2, big coats. If you're in extreme cold where you have to have a heavy outer layer, multiple layers possibly underneath, again, this can be difficult to get to because this material is a heavy-duty material. It won't stretch. It's going to be hard to get to my firearm and my hip. Now again, I can carry a nice larger firearm and conceal it easily, but if I can't access it, it's a problem. You could look at a shoulder holster, possibly leave this down enough that you could get in here and get to a shoulder rig fairly quickly. That's one option. Another option to consider is a pocket gun. Just like you might have in the summertime in your pocket, you can have a pocket gun in your coat where you could quickly access it and fight your way to a larger handgun. Something that's quick and available for you to get to with that large outer layer. Be aware that you need to use a pocket holster. Don't just stick the gun in your pocket. Just like with pocket carry in the summertime, I need to have a holster that will protect that trigger guard, keep the gun safe. And I want something that has a sticky outer layer if possible, or some way to secure it inside so that I don't have to fight to get that holster off. I want to be able to draw it, access it quickly if at all possible. Okay, tip number 3, your sleeves. We've dealt with the outer garment, we've dealt with a large coat when we need one. We also have to be aware of our sleeves getting in the way of the draw. If you can get a coat like this that has the buttons that tighten up, I can do different levels to get it tight enough. This won't be in the way. You could look at elastic material, something that's going to stay tight to your wrists and not be hanging down over. Some of my coats have a Velcro type of strap that you can tighten it down. So you always want to have, especially that gun wrist, tight so that you're not going to get it jammed up in your draw. So that's just a matter of checking your coats, buying ones that are made for that, where you have some tightness there, and not wearing something that's going to get in the way where you're not going to have access to the firearm. So you've got to consider those sleeves, check them out, and make sure you have something that you can reliably access your gun without it getting in the way. Okay, tip number 4, gloves. The key with the gloves is I need to have something that's snug that I can handle my gun properly with. Okay, so I need to have driver's gloves, shooting gloves, The mechanics gloves they make are great. Something that you're going to be able to handle the gun reliably. So you want to check that out and make sure that your finger is going to fit in the trigger guard. If you look at this 1911, we have a pretty small trigger guard on this replica. This glove actually fits in there. If yours doesn't, for whatever firearm you carry, then that's not going to work for you. You got to have something that you're going to be able to reliably control the gun and control the trigger with. Now, the other issue, if you're in extreme cold conditions, is looking at having a set of mittens or some large type of ski glove. You want to practice actually ripping that off quickly, ripping that off, throwing it, and going for your draw. Depending on the conditions that you're in. So either really snug gloves or ones you can get rid of fast, and practice that as part of your draw stroke. Tip number 5, ballistics. Okay, when we're looking at cold weather, especially if somebody has something like a Carhartt, some heavy outer coat on, the round has to perform. It has to be able to penetrate those outer barriers and then still do what it needs to do inside the person. A lot of times what can happen with a hollow point, it can actually fill up with material and then act like a round nose bullet when it goes into the person, go right through them without dropping that energy into their body, and that's not going to stop the threat nearly as quickly. So I'm a big fan of critical duty. We went to a training a few years ago, or a demonstration I should say. Multiple departments brought their ammunition that they carry on duty, and we fired it through a lot of intermediate barriers, including heavy clothing, drywall, steel, and automobile glass, and critical duty outperformed all of them. So something to consider: buy a quality self-defense round, whether it's like I said, that critical duty, or another round that's made specifically for self-defense and dealing with these intermediate barriers and heavy clothing. And finally, tip number 6, practice. Okay, whatever gear you have on, whatever clothing you have on, you need to practice in it. So take some time, get your rig on, get what you normally wear, and run it. Work with it. Make sure your gloves are going to work. Make sure your sleeves aren't in the way. Make sure your coat is going to be out of the way. Try it from different positions. Try it seated in a vehicle. It's better to fail in training and make those mistakes when you're practicing than make that mistake in a life and death situation. Okay, so to recap, be aware of that outer garment, whether you can access it, how only have one layer between. Make sure it's not too tight at the bottom and you can get to it. With the big coats, consider pocket carry, possibly a shoulder holster if that works for you. Make sure your sleeves are not in the way, you got some kind of elastic. Make sure your gloves are snug enough to do the job. Make sure you have the ballistics to penetrate a heavy coat and still do the job. And then practice. Get out there and practice with your gear. Get outside in the cold a little bit, or even inside, and try all the different coats you wear, what you normally wear, and make sure you can access reliably. Alright guys, if you enjoyed the video, please hit like and subscribe and leave a comment below.